A much-needed and anticipated four-day ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas in the besieged Gaza has kicked in, with truckloads of aid supplies already entering the Strip. Now, the deal will see the stopping of the 7-week-long Israeli bombardment of the Gaza Strip, killing nearly 15,000 Palestinians. The first batch of Israeli captives and Palestinian prisoners will be released as part of the deal. However, some humanitarian organizations have poured cold water on the four-day truce, saying it's not nearly enough to deal with the crisis in Gaza. The United Nations Children's Fund is calling for a lengthy and comprehensive deal. Let's speak now to UNICEF South Africa's Chief of Communications and Partnerships, Toby Fricker. Toby, good morning to you and thank you for your time. My understanding is that you were somewhere near the area of conflict and only arriving back in South Africa last night. Just give us your first experiences of what you saw in the Middle East.
Yeah, so I was based in Amman in Jordan, supporting our operations, our team inside the Gaza Strip. And I think, you know, what, as you just mentioned, this pause is a respite, let's say, for children, a very, very much needed respite for children inside Gaza. In fact, one of my colleagues last night sent a message from Gaza where he met a family with children, and they were saying, you know, we just need room to breathe. You know, they were welcoming the pause in the fact they had room to breathe, but they also said that this won't end until the war ends. We won't be safe. Our children won't be safe. But it's absolutely, you know, critical that first of all, we have a stop to the ongoing intensity of the hostilities to protect children, civilians, that we have the Israeli children who are abducted to be freed immediately. And then we can scale up as well the life-saving aid to reach people who are in need, which is pretty much everywhere inside the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, you may not have been necessarily inside the conflict zone, Toby, but the people that you are saying that you were there to support as part of the UNICEF team, and in particular, yours is concerned with the well-being of children. We have heard that this is one war in the history of wars that has seen so many children killed. What are your teams telling you about the atrocities visited particularly upon children?
Yeah, that's right. We've had teams inside the Gaza Strip for many, many years. I've worked there before with our teams on the ground. And the situation is catastrophic, as we've said, for children. We have, you know, staff members who've spoken about their own children who are going through such distress that they're resorting to self-harm, because day in, day out, the intensity of the hostilities is of course massively traumatic for every child there. And we've had a situation now where you have 1.7 million people displaced, including around 800,000 children, and they're densely packed, living in shelters, mainly in the southern areas of the Gaza Strip, but also in the north, where they're in horrific conditions, so very limited access to safe water, around 3 litres per person per day, and it should be the emergency threshold, at least, that we try to reach is 15 litres per day per person. They have sanitary conditions which are horrific, where you have one toilet for 150 people, for example. And so these are huge concerns, particularly the winter's coming. You get rains inside the Gaza Strip across the region at this time of year, and that will only worsen conditions, particularly for the youngest children who may be exposed to outbreaks of waterborne diseases and others, and a healthcare system that then can't cope and deal with that as well.
Oh, Toby, as a journalist, you know, you interview people all the time, but there are certain words or phrases that immediately strike a chord with you. When you say that children resorted or were resorting to self-harm because of the amount of fear and the danger that they are experiencing on a daily basis, are you able to put that into words or a proper description as to what exactly do you mean when you say children resorted to self-harm?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can tell you the experience of one of our staff members' children. She has a 4-year-old. She has 2 daughters. One is a 4-year-old. And she was saying how the 4-year-old was like literally ripping her hair, scratching her thighs until they bleed. It was such trauma that she was living through every day. These are the immediate impacts of that, this stress. But it's also, of course, has a long-term impact on the well-being of children, young people. And we've said that here in South Africa as well, around mental well-being. This has a long-term impact on how children develop, progress, how they learn or progress in education, and then obviously longer-term in terms of their economic sort of output and ability to work. So it's immediate and long-term, but these horrors are, it's hard to even imagine what people are going through, both inside the Gaza Strip and these children who were abducted in Israel and children who continue to be traumatized by what's going on inside Israel as well.
Yeah, and Toby, you remind me of a documentary, in fact, about Gaza. It was on the wars that have continued in that Gaza Strip, and it was, in fact, a documentary that was told through the eyes of the children, the trauma they suffer, some of them telling stories about how their siblings that they would have been sitting with because of bombardment, they died and they still see their faces. I don't know if you've seen that documentary, but it's horrific, the pain that these children have to live through, having witnessed things like that. But let's talk about the 4-day ceasefire. The understanding is that aid organizations, and I'm not sure whether UNICEF is also agreeing with the statement, that this is not nearly enough in order to deal with the humanitarian crisis inside the Gaza Strip. Where do you stand as UNICEF?
Well, I mean, like I said, for children, for families now, any respite is needed. They need that immediately. In terms of life-saving aid, what we say is that it should be delivered at all times, at a scale according to the need, which right now is immense. It should be delivered in a safe and unimpeded way. We've had 108 UN staff members from the UN Palestine Refugee Agency, UNRWA, killed. So it's incredibly dangerous, incredibly complicated situation to work in, of course. But we should be able to do that at all times. So recently we had a UNICEF UN interagency mission to the Al-Shifa hospital where we were able to thankfully at least save some young lives, 31 premature babies that were moved out of there. So we can operate, but it's incredibly difficult. With the so-called sort of pause, then the aim is really to scale that up as much as we can. But there's multiple partners doing that, and there's multiple people doing whatever they can to then move that life-saving assistance around. It's still difficult. You have infrastructure that has been damaged, roads damaged. You have potentially unexploded ordnance around, which in itself is a danger. But I know for sure UNICEF, UN, and many others will be doing whatever they can to support children who are in massive need.
Yeah. Toby, you will know that over the last couple of days, there has been much talk, particularly at a political level, and I know that this is not your field, but I'm going to try and ask you the question. Feel free to say this is not my area of expertise and therefore, unfortunately, I cannot engage in this. There's been a lot of talk about the Gaza Strip and what the Israeli forces are described to be engaged in. Some people using the word genocide and war crimes. In fact, part of what is expected to happen today is that as this 4-day ceasefire or humanitarian pause takes hold, there's going to be that exchange. 50 people, and in the majority, it's understood that it's going to be women from Israel, including children, that will likely be released. As an organization that is concerned with the well-being of children, talk to us about whether you as UNICEF would at all be involved in any referral to the International Criminal Court on what has been described as war crimes, given the number of children that have died in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, as UNICEF, there are international legal bodies, that look into those issues. As UNICEF, our obligation here as a humanitarian agency is number one to provide emergency assistance to children in need. That's number one, and that's right now that's a huge need. The second thing is our obligation to remind all parties to the conflict of their own obligations to protect children, to protect civilians during hostilities. And that means doing whatever they can to best protect children and civilian objects, which means hospitals, water infrastructure, other services that children rely on for life, let's say. And that's something we continue to do. We've done since the start, and we continue to do, and we will continue to do. And we continue to call on this humanitarian ceasefire, to scale up aid, and to better protect children and civilians wherever they are inside the Gaza Strip. And that work goes on, of course.
Toby Fricker, let me thank you very much for your time. In fact, as we conclude the conversation with Toby Fricker, who is with UNICEF, we can tell you that this is a live picture coming out of the Gaza Strip. In fact, this is the border, the Rafah border. It's essentially the point between Gaza and Egypt. So that is the border that has made it possible for at least some of the people who have been stuck in this conflict zone to make a getaway, and the trucks as well that are delivering aid into the Gaza Strip. That is the border that we understand they have been entering through. So it is a story that we continue to watch very closely here on Newzroom Afrika. All right.